Profoundly deaf means that you still got some residual hearing. So for me, I can hear a lot of impacts of sound. What I don't get through the ear is the resonance. It is simply a piece of music that we're all on this journey, including the audience. So we as players are one aspect of that. I think that the sense of curiosity, I keep saying that, is so incredibly important. We know that whatever profession or whatever you are learning at that time, whether you're 8 years old, 28 or 88, there's going to be hard work there. That has to just be an accepted thing. But what is important, I feel, is finding a way to bring improvisation and thinking outside of the box a little bit. So when we're asked to practice our scales, what are we trying to do?
Hey guys, I've got a quick request. Could you subscribe, like, and comment if you like the content we're making? It's really important to support the channel and carry on having great guests like we've had. So subscribe, like, comment. Very important. Thank you. Thank you very much, Evelyn. Can I ask you to introduce yourself the way you would like to be introduced?
My name is Evelyn Glennie and I'm a musician who specialises in solo percussion. I'm also the founder of the Evelyn Glennie Foundation and the curator of the Evelyn Glennie collection.
Great. And we are in your room with your collection. It reminds me my percussion class or department where it was full of instruments that were owned by probably a 2/3 were owned by the teacher.
Wow.
And when he went out because unfortunately his wife was very ill, he went with all his instruments and it was completely empty.
Incredible.
But yeah, it's great. There's so many different instruments. I'll try to take some pictures or shots of it.
Yes, I mean, this is only part of the collection because the collection also incorporates things like the music scores. So often when I've commissioned pieces, you might have the first draft of a score, second draft and so on. And it's really interesting to see how a composer has gone on that journey and develops the piece. The collection also consists of clothing and recordings and interviews and press cuttings and just all sorts of things. So really the instruments, which is obviously the most obvious thing that you see, is really only one part of the collection.
Obviously, well, it's a big privilege for me to be here, and thank you very much for accepting the recordings. Obviously, you did so many interviews and so many podcasts as well, so I tried to think about a different angle, but I'm very interested in psychology and education, so maybe we'll take that angle. And you have a very strong personality, but and very driven, but very kind as well. And you've taken a very different angle in your life, and you didn't accept what people were telling you, were qualifying you. Where does that come from? I understand some part of it comes from childhood, your relationship with your parents, brothers and sisters, friends. Do you know where that confidence comes from and that determination?
No, not really. I don't know. I think what I am very grateful for is having the upbringing I had. I was brought up on a farm in the northeast of Scotland with my parents and 2 brothers. And of course, in that environment, you're given a lot of responsibilities at a very young age.
Yes.
So you're also surrounded by things whereby you have to be conscious of them. So livestock, machinery, that type of thing. So as a kid, those are big things. But ultimately, there's an awful lot of trust that goes with that. So when your parents ask you to do something, whether it's feeding the cattle or moving cattle from one field to another field, and you've got to hold the traffic on a main road by the time the cattle cross that road or something, that's a responsibility. Or feeding sick lambs or whatever it might be, or using a machine to slice turnips cramps and so on. I mean, I remember all of those things, and so really there's a great potential for things to go wrong, actually. But I think that instilled a sense of responsibility and trust, and also when you're asked to do something, you do it. So you can't procrastinate in that kind of environment.
Yeah.
And so whether that had anything to do, you know, with the kind of, I suppose, single-mindedness moving forward, and the idea of making an aim really simple in your mind. So for example, when I decided to go in for music, the aim was simple. I want to be a solo percussionist. So solo percussionist was simply tattooed on my forehead. That was in my mind. So of course, how do you get there? You know, what do you do? That is the where the hard work comes in. So if you think of a snooker player, for example, they're not concentrating on getting the ball into the hole. They're making sure that everything else is functioning well in order for the ball to get into that hole. So that was what it was like for me. So solo percussion was already in my mind, but how do I get there? What do I do? What do I need to prepare? You know, how do I organize for this? What should I be doing? And that's where really the kind of organization in your own mind has to take place. And it can just be almost like a massive elephant, you know, you don't know where to start, what to do, and all of that. But I'm a big believer in everything starts with one step or one little brick, you know, one little thing, and from that another thing emerges. So I think this has had a huge part on the kind of longevity of my career, because that's what I've wanted, you know, to the aim to sustain a career as a musician. And with that comes curiosity. So I think the whole idea when you create something from scratch really is that there has to be this innate sense of curiosity, and the willingness to accept things when they don't go your way. There's a lot of that, and that will continue for as long as you breathe.
How were your parents with you at that when you were around 8, when you started to lose your hearing? How did they take it, and how did you take it as well? I'm interested because we've got friends whose little girl has got like some hearing deficiencies in just one ear, and the mum was very positive, and she said it's good that you need to explain it to your whole class and say it's normal, there's a disability for everybody. This is my hearing aid. This is why I've got it. It's cool because it's a cool colour. And she's very positive, and she's going to own it, and she's not going to be shy about it. But the dad had a different approach. Like, he was feeling sorry for her. He was fearing that she might get bullied. And, you know, it's really interesting because it's those two aspects where there's nothing right or wrong. And I guess those two feelings come to you at some different times. But yes, there's the feeling that if you've got a disability, or if you've got something different than your peers, then you may be bullied because you don't fit in correctly. But on the other hand, you really need to own it. And the best way to do it is to explain people and to be close to them and open about your characteristics. So how did you approach it? Because I bought your book called it's not your book, but the book about your story called Listen, and I got it for my daughter. And there's one section that says that when you started to lose your hearing, then your dad said she's not going to go to a specialist school, she's just going to stay in her school because she can do everything, all the rest right. So why does she need to be in a box? So yeah, how did you feel about it?
Absolutely. Well, I think from my parents' perspective, they were pretty grounded. Of course, you know, they went through that journey of concern, and they didn't know what the future might be. And of course, in those days, you know, things were quite matter of fact and how the message was put across. So we didn't have, obviously this was the days before internet and things like that, so you couldn't have role models in quite the same way that you can access nowadays. But I think importantly, I went to a tiny country primary school that only had 37 pupils in the entire school.
Okay.
So the two teachers who were there knew every single pupil and knew practically every aspect of that pupil and knew the families as well. So it was a tiny school just in the farming community. It wasn't even in a village. It was just on a hill, isolated. And so the relationship that is built really between teachers and families in those days is quite different to how it is now. So that was important, so you could actually talk about things. But also I think the general mindset of people in the northeast of Scotland is not to make a mountain out of a molehill. So they're quite kind of practical people and don't want to make a big issue over something, and they, even now sometimes when I go back, they're not sort of seeing somebody as like, oh wow, you're doing this or doing that or something. It's just, oh hello, and you're very much integrated with how people are there, and I really like that, and I appreciate that, and I think that was kind of the mindset in that, you are doing what you're doing now, and you will continue to do that for as long as you're enjoying it. And that was the key thing, is making sure that I was happy, that I was kind of improving, happy, just being a kind of normal kid in a way. My two brothers were my two brothers, you know what I mean? And sometimes they were really helpful, and then other times they were quite, nasty, and they would cover their faces or their mouths or talk in the dark or something. Typical brothers, but lovely. And but when I went to a bigger secondary school that had over 1,000 pupils, again the school was incredibly supportive, and they had very good peripatetic teachers come in. So, for example, myself and another boy who had a hearing impairment had a peripatetic teacher for the deaf who came in to make sure that we were coping in our lessons, that we had, we knew what homework we needed to do, just anything extra that needed to happen. And that was fantastic. But it was the kind of school that opened its doors to every single pupil of the school. So if somebody happened to be in a wheelchair, the sporting department was open to them. So they could be a sports person if they wanted. If somebody was sight impaired, they could belong to the art department. If somebody was hearing impaired, they could belong to the music department. So, and that mindset rubs off in the whole school, within staff and pupils. And so the belief that every child has something within themselves that makes them interesting, that makes them tick, that makes them, wow, what's that about, that makes them curious. It's up to the school to find that thing, and then as far as possible to nourish that, so it isn't always just about ticking the A's and the B's and the C's in an exam or something. It's much more about getting into that person and really finding out what it is that's so special about that. And so I think I was very, very, very lucky with my education and just having all the opportunities.
Did you know from the start that you wanted to be a musician, professional musician, or it just came with time?
Yes, it really it came along pretty naturally as regards to making that decision. So when I reached the age of 15, whereby I was deciding which subjects to carry on with at school, I just thought to myself then that music is playing a big part in my life. I'm really enjoying it. And I will give music a go. So what I was very conscious of was that, there's quite a big difference between doing music in between a whole load of other subjects at school to then suddenly only doing music, and how might that change my feeling. So nevertheless, I decided that this would be the thing I would try on the condition I would follow solo percussion. So it was really clear in my mind, and I was prepared to do something else if that did not happen. So it wasn't just the be all and end all, and it would be disastrous if it didn't work. But nevertheless, that's what I wanted to do. And so I then just only auditioned for 2 places, the Royal College and Royal Academy of Music, both in London, only for experience, because I had no idea what sort of level I was in a national sense. And I needed to have that kind of experience and to get some sort of gauge in my mind as to whether I'd even, have any kind of chance.
Sorry, what sort of test did you need to take to get
to audition?
To audition, because I kind of heard about it in another podcast that you did, especially with Carol Jarvis, and it seemed to be pretty hard. So you must have had a really good level to just take the tests or the audition.
Yes, a normal, in those days, of course, it may be different now, but the normal audition was that you had to prepare X amount of excerpts on your principal instrument, in my case, percussion, and then you had to play a second instrument. So again, piano was my instrument. So I think I played a Mozart sonata or something, and then things like the usual things such as sight reading and transposition and looking at a score and deciding who might have composed that and that type of thing, score reading. So just generally, and then you had to do a paper exam, usually on the same day as the practical. And then you'd have a letter to say whether you got in or not. Simple as that. Of course, with the academy, I had to do the full audition, and they did not accept me on the basis that they didn't feel it was going to be possible for an orchestra to accept a hearing impaired musician.
It was just their feeling.
Yeah, it was something that I felt, well, I just need an answer as to whether the audition was okay or not okay. Because if it wasn't of the standard, then okay, I could either, just wait a year, practice harder, prepare better, whatever. But if it was okay and I still wasn't getting in, then where do I go from there? And so once I knew the reason for not accepting me, I find that very difficult to take because you can't predict, what other organisations are going to do or not do. And then you can't, just say, well, just because you're deaf or blind or you've got one leg, one arm or whatever, somebody else isn't going to accept you. That's very dangerous, dodgy ground to get into. So I felt that I had a point just to say, if I was off the standard to get in, I should be accepted.
Yeah.
Simple as that. If you have too many people that and not enough spaces, then I get that. I understand that. But if the reason is based on my hearing, I'm not going to accept that. So
that's pretty strong, to say this. Well, how old were you at that time?
I was 16 when 16?
I auditioned. I don't think I would have said it if I would have just taken it.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I guess, that's just how I felt, and I felt very strongly about that. And I think possibly, again, the school environment was that, well, everybody can do something here, and it's listening to that person. And of course, an audition doesn't always have to pick the best players. Yeah. They have to see through that player and what is it that they feel that, is there something in that individual that they think, I can sense that they want to improve, or I can sense that they're dedicated, or, I can sense that they might get on with other people, or I can sense that they've got an aim, that kind of thing. In a way, I had all of those things, to be honest, and a very clear vision. But part of the issue also was that because I said I wanted to be a solo percussionist and not in an orchestra, this was something that in those days, in the early 80s, had not really existed before. So the image of seeing somebody give a percussion recital or stand up in front of an orchestra to play percussion was not something that was in their minds. And so therefore it was like a double whammy. We've got someone who's hearing impaired and they want to be a solo percussionist. I don't think so. So really, anyway, I kind of did sort of stand my ground a bit. And so they asked me to return to London to do another unprepared audition. Mm-hmm. So this was all done at the piano keyboard. Mm-hmm. And it was nothing to do with percussion at all. Yeah. And it was all to do with transposition, score reading, figure bass, looking at pieces and doing all sorts of things. And immediately after that, they said, you can start in September.
Great.
And it was interesting because it sort of brought all of the, not all, but a lot of the elements that I had kind of grown up with musically, and the kind of teaching that I had, certainly with my percussion teacher, where he didn't see us as percussion players, mm-hmm. he saw us as sound creators, as musicians, and then the percussion just happened to be the thing that we manipulated. And I think that went a long way as regards to how I see music, how I relate to sound. It doesn't matter what I'm playing. Yeah. What is the story that you're telling through the sound that you're trying to find through the object that you have in front of you. So I think that the audition aspects were not kind of suited my kind of feeling and thoughts about music. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't there to be the perfect percussion player. I probably may not have got in if that was the case, but I was there to express, to tell the story of how I felt the music to be, and that's how I've been ever since, because a lot of the new music I play, you can't find on the internet or in a CD store or anything like that. So it's all had to come from within and then getting it out there. So your interpretation is your journey. It's not somebody else's journey from YouTube. Yeah. It is your journey, and that journey will change. That journey will have bumps, and lumps, and it will have things that you think, ooh, crumbs, I'm not quite sure what to do with this yet, but I need performances to find that out, and that's the beauty of what we do. When
I had to take an audition for a music school, and it was organ, and I nearly got refused. That's the teacher told me after the audition. I was nearly refused because I played too fast, and it was the piece I've played was too happy, or it should have been more sad. And I just, when he told me this, I just thought, okay, fair enough, but I still got accepted. And it's not like a really big conservatoire, prestigious. It's just a music school because we moved from one city to another. Mm-hmm. But now I'm thinking, how narrow-minded was this?
Yes.
To just not refuse based on your interpretation. And I guess there's, you try to stand back from your music education, your education generally, and maybe the approach to that music school was too classic, and we were too exposed to classical music and just reading papers, and with a little bit of interpretation, but very little. And so it makes people very rigid with their way of playing music, perceiving music, wanting to listen to some very specific types of music. Mm-hmm. There's one episode that's coming soon. It's not being recorded yet, but it's about music psychology with Victoria Williamson. And she says in her book that we're very alert and to the cultural side of the music. So if we're used to playing or listening to a certain type of music, we will be very attached to it. Hopefully I'm saying it right. But any other type of music, we will not be as attached and may criticize it as well, or not appreciate it as much. but the type of music you're familiar to. So, it's kind of that education. You need to be able to play and exposed to a lot of different types of music. Fortunately, you can't do it perfectly, but at least not just classical music.
Absolutely, and I think that's such an important thing. Of course, you can lean towards a type of music that you feel a particular affinity with, and that can change, over time, whatever people want to do. But I think the exposure that young people have, music is music, it really is, and it often comes from things that have not been notated. It comes from so many cultural aspects, and there's such great music out in the world that has not been promoted by PR companies or record companies or anything like that. It is in a little village somewhere in a remote place, and it's just incredible. Or you might see a street musician that is just so intriguing, and you think, wow, that's so interesting. And I think that absolutely, if we keep our antennae open, keep our mind thoughts, really kind of is open and as clear as can be, then, everything is classical in a way, everything is valuable. And so the idea of classical, in my mind, is a period of time, historically. But for somebody to write a new piece of music for an orchestra or a percussion concerto, I don't fit that into the classical mold. It's too early to categorize that piece of music. It is simply a piece of music, that we're all on this journey, including the audience, as part of that premiere. And then we need more players to play that piece, to just allow that piece to speak and grow and develop and so on. So, we as players are one aspect of that.
You said you wanted to be very early on. You knew you wanted to be a solo percussionist. Why? Because
why?
There wasn't any at the time.
Well, actually,
maybe there was.
It's an interesting question because at secondary school, I and my fellow musical colleagues, percussion players, were all given a chance to play little solos in the school concerts. And or in the community concerts and so on. So it was perfectly normal for us to play little things on the xylophone. That's what we had at school. We didn't have marimbas or vibraphones and things. And it was wonderful, and it felt so normal. And I loved playing in front of the audience. I loved how, it was just something a little bit different to what they normally saw. But it was also the feeling of being able to express, because ultimately, I was the same as the violinists and the pianists and the cellists and the trumpet players. We were all musicians. And I really liked that. I just loved the feeling of standing up and playing. Percussion was the focus. And that felt very right to me. And I also enjoyed the exploration of repertoire. And of course, there was no solo percussion repertoire that we found in the northeast of Scotland. So you're delving into piano works and traditional music and violin and flute pieces and so on, and seeing if they would work on your tiddly little xylophone. And so that was all interesting. And it just somehow felt right. I can't really say any more than that.
What's your approach to education generally and music education? There's obviously it's really important to enjoy playing music to carry on. If we don't enjoy playing an instrument, there's no point doing it, and we won't be motivated to work hard. That's my view. But at what point do you get the enjoyment on the side and say, right, you need to work on the basics there? Or do you get just the child not necessarily a child, an adult, to focus on something, to find something they really like, and then they'll want to work hard on it, or maybe not. They will just try to enjoy simple things, and it's perfectly okay. Because That's something I'm struggling to put in my mind. My wife is much better at making me stand back from that. But yeah, enjoyment is key. And then if you want to do it as a job, there's responsibilities and you have to be dedicated to it because it's really highly competitive. Yeah. So what's your approach to all this?
Yes, it's a huge question and different ways suit different people ultimately. But I think that the sense of curiosity, I keep saying that, but is so incredibly important.
Yeah.
And I feel that the balance, we know that whatever profession or whatever you are learning at that time, whether you're 8 years old, 28 or 88, it doesn't matter. There's going to be hard work there. So that has to just be an accepted thing.
Yeah.
There will be work that has to go along with what you're trying to learn or develop. And there's no point in trying to fight that. But what is important, I feel, is finding a way to bring improvisation and thinking outside of the box a little bit in how things are approached. So when we're asked to practice our scales, what are we trying to do? So what are we trying to achieve when we're asked to practice scales? And scales, what are scales? So we talk about C major or B major or D minor or whatever it might be, but what are they actually, expressively, what are scales, And then what can we do to, as far as improvisation with those scales, that suddenly builds up a little bit of a story. So you might say to yourself, okay, I've been asked to learn the scale of C major. So you go up and down C major. What does that feel like? So finding descriptive words. What would happen if I started C major on a different note, started it on D or B or A or whatever, how does that make me feel? Physically, how does it make me feel? So thinking about all aspects of what you do as a musician, so as a percussion player, I might think, okay, well, I've got, I would normally use 2 limbs to play a scale. What would happen if I just did one? What would happen if I used my weaker hand in order to build strength there? What would happen if I used one hand for all the black notes and the other for all the white notes? What would happen if I mixed that up? What would happen if I did it in paradiddles? What would happen if I included a bass drum and a hi-hat here and I played the scale of C major? Does it become suddenly all lumpy because I've got 2 extra limbs now to think about? So it's finding ways to spice things up. And this will lead you into being more comfortable with improvisation. But it also affects your listening, and that affects the balance, your physical balance with your body as well. And it's just kind of fun too. And so that if you do a boo-boo, it's no longer a boo-boo. You know how to get around that, because you're comfortable in making sure that body is all working together.
Yep.
So you're not reliant on your stronger hand because you know that your other hand is as strong as your weaker hand. You know that your listening is really, completely elastic. And you know that you're bringing the emotion of what you do into play. And ultimately, that is the most important thing. So why is it that C major is a very friendly-like key? What is it about it that makes us feel like that? It's a happy kind of key. Why is A minor a more sort of lonely, not threatening, but it's just a lonely, sad key? Why is D flat major just like eating dark chocolate? What is it about that? And for us to take time to listen to that, and when we bring the listening in, suddenly the physical aspects actually become secondary, and we find that, crumbs, I've just played that D flat major and it was absolutely lovely, as opposed to correct. So it's thinking about the language we use as well when we're discussing things like dynamics. What is loud? What is soft? What is MF? What is MP? What does that mean in this room? What does it mean in an outdoor venue? What does it mean, in your kitchen? What does it mean in your classroom? What does it mean in your teaching room? And so on and so forth. And really feeling the differences of playing loud in these different kinds of settings, these different acoustics. How does that affect you physically? How does it affect your giving of that sound? So there's so many things to think about, but we often approach it from this one angle. Scales are learnt first of all, or whatever it might be, So why isn't improvisation in our exams? Why isn't improvisation in the auditions? It could tell an awful lot about a person. So somebody, imagine if John Cage was auditioning and he decided to sit still for 4 minutes, 33 seconds. We'd think, we'd put him off in a white, jacket or something, and he wouldn't belong into a music institution. But here we are, so many years later, and it's probably one of the most talked about pieces of music ever. But do you see what I mean? I just think it's so interesting when we can really, I guess, zoom out of a situation, and what is it that we do as musicians when we play? It isn't just play our instruments well. What does that mean? Because that's changing from day to day. It's about that story, that expressiveness. What does it mean to that person? How does it get projected? And I think that's the issue when we're dealing with so many audiences nowadays. We're dealing with the digital audience, we're dealing with the audience in that space. So you have two very different scenarios there. Who are we performing to? Are we performing to the microphone? Are we, often microphones and video cameras are almost like an extension to our instruments nowadays, But psychologically, that can change your headspace. So what is it? Am I playing to this, or am I playing to Joe and Beryl in the audience, So
do you think we can do without scales? We could learn an instrument well and excel in an instrument without scales? I never had to do scales with organ. I only started doing scales when I was doing percussions, especially for marimba. And then you've got, it's not called scales, it's called rudiments.
Rudements.
In percussions. So it's a little bit different. But I guess the benefits, from my perspective, from having scales was to perfect the technique, because you can obviously play fast or play slow or play pianissimo or fortissimo. But also, something I wasn't expecting is you learn the notes you can play for a certain tonality. After that, you need to improvise. And doing that for the marimba was really helpful for playing keyboard and piano. So I knew which, a bit more naturally, or it's instinctive to just, if you play or want to improvise in a certain key, which notes will go well together. That's my small view.
Yes, absolutely. I remember when we were learning the xylophone at school, so this was before seeing a marimba or anything, and my teacher would have taken a bit of Bach, for example. He would have taken anything, but he might have just taken the first phrase or the first few bars or whatever made sense. And so he would say to us, what key is that in? So you would say whatever key it was in. What does that feel like? What does a G major feel like? So he wasn't telling you what you think you should be feeling, but what do you feel that to you? What does that feel like? And so immediately you're building up a story, and then you'd look at the phrase, and so that's a form of sight reading, just looking at it and just seeing the kind of general shape, and then you would look at the rhythm of that. So if it was a bit like a Bach partita, so just goes on and on and on and on like that. However, it doesn't feel monotonous, when it's got pitch there,
Yeah.
and when there's a key signature, a key signature there. But if you isolate the rhythm, then it's very monotonous. So what is it that makes it suddenly come alive? And so that's why he took something like that and said, now play that phrase on the snare drum. So we wouldn't have just gone, and all the different kind of sound colours. So, doing funny things with our arm angles, or how the sticks were playing or popped on that drum, or whatever it might be. And so much of that, you would have been told, no, you can't hold your sticks like this, or you can't have your finger on top of the sticks and things like that, being a no-go. But for expression, anything is possible, and that's what I think was so fascinating, that allowed all these doors to open. It was, you were given permission, I suppose, in your own mind to explore that. And so I guess, his teaching of coming at these things from a sound creator point of view was absolutely key.
Can we talk a little bit about your, your hearing impairment? When, first of all, can you explain what profoundly deaf means? Because I read your hearing essay online, and there's a bit of a misunderstanding of what it is exactly. So can you explain?
Profoundly deaf means that you still got some residual hearing. So for me, I can hear a lot of impacts of sound. So if I come down on a drum with a stick, I will get that impact. What I don't get through the ear is the resonance. So if I play pitch on the marimba or something, I won't get the pitch, so I won't be able to say that's a C or that's a B flat. I will be able to say, that's in the middle register or in the low register or in the high register. But the pitches are not coming over as pitches as such. So it's very important then for the eye to be part of the hearing process in order to see what you're actually striking. So the ear won't be enough to pick that up. What you also don't get, I don't get through the ear, is the resonance of the sound. And this is why the body is so important to come into play, so that the body actually picks up from the impact, resonance, impact, resonance. Now, obviously, the impact you're also feeling through the body, but if the dynamic is low, you're not going to pick that up through the ear. So, for example, in my case, strings are very difficult to hear. They're just really hard to hear. And sometimes you just don't hear anything. And sometimes you will. It depends on the impact of the dynamic level.
Sorry, about strings. Is it on stage or generally?
That can vary, because if it's on stage, and this is most of the time when I experience music, so I don't listen to music that often. And besides, you can control, the volume, but even with that, you're not necessarily able to have the visual aid to see, the violins are really playing loud there. I think with a live situation, you can see what's going on, and that's really important. So a lot of times when I position my percussion on stage, it's at a 90-degree angle to the audience, so that you can see about 3/4 of the orchestra, and they can see you as well, and that's really important. So if you're preparing a stroke on something, you're almost like a conductor. They can see, what you're about to do, and it's the same with me and them. So I can see, whether that's a rich sound, whether it's a deep sound. I mean, deep as in the depth of sound as opposed to register, or I can see if they're, up in heaven or something, not necessarily in register, but just in that sense of touch. So that's really important. So it's a whole mixture. If an orchestra is playing all together, tutti, basically, you're not able to pick out what the clarinets are doing in relation to the brass, because it's this one hoop of sound and one kind of general feeling. So you're not able to distinguish what's what. But because you've learnt that piece from the full score, you know already who is playing where.
Yeah.
So you know already that, okay, the 4 bars before I come in, the trumpets are playing. So you can hear the trumpets.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because you're expecting them. If you're not expecting them, it'll be too late.
Yeah.
So by the time you've clocked it's the trumpets that are playing, they've been and gone.
Yeah.
By the time you've clocked the cellos are playing, they've been and gone. So you'll only pick up that more if you're actually looking at the orchestra from an audience point of view.
Yeah.
So it's quite complicated because there isn't a way where you hear the same piece if it's on radio, on YouTube, coming through an MP3 player or being played live. They will be completely different experiences, very different experiences.
The reason why I asked you on the stage or not is because sometimes the floor can transmit a lot of vibration.
Oh, heavens, yeah.
And depending on this construction, whether it's raised floor or it's like floor on concrete, and I know you play bare feet
often.
So I guess the violins are a bit hard to hear, as you said. Maybe the cellos could be easier and the basses could be easier to perceive, depending on, and I presume you can feel them with your
much easier
from the legs.
Absolutely. The low instruments are my kind of favourite, as it were, because and often I will set my things up on the cello side, if possible. It's not always possible. Sometimes you have to use both sides of the conductor. But if possible, I'll put most of the mallet stuff on the cello side. And yeah, that's the way it is.
How do you perceive the acoustics of venues and rooms? Do you perceive it at all and feel it?
Yes, and it's hard to describe, but yes, you do perceive it, but it's based on what you kind of just this feeling, first of all. So you walk into a space and immediately I'll look at the materials. So how a place is set out. So is there a lot of curtains or drapes, or the depth of the stage, size of the stage, just all sorts of things. It's the audience raked. Are they flat? Is there a lot of wood? Is there a lot of concrete? That kind of thing. So you get the basics of what the acoustics could be. But ultimately, I don't think any musician is fully in control of acoustics. I really don't. No. I think everybody has an opinion on acoustics. And for me, because I'm dealing with so many instruments that have different frequencies, different lengths, durations, different attacks, different dynamics, a triangle and a bass drum. A timpani and a tom-tom, in a dry acoustic as opposed to a wet acoustic are two different scenarios. And therefore, how you're going to deal with the dynamics, the type of mallets you're going to use and so on will change. And you'll often need somebody out there in the space to let you know actually what is happening. So because I quite like to play incredibly softly, I can hear my soft playing because I'm doing it, you know what I mean? So I'm perceiving that. And so therefore I think it's there, it's present. But somebody out there might say, oh, can't hear anything, you've got to play louder, Well, I then have to decide how much do I want the audience to use their other senses to perceive the dynamic. So to really bring the body language in and to use the sense of sight to perceive something is moving there. So is there, isn't there, rather than giving them the dynamic. But that's a choice. But the point is that because we think of music as being an oral activity in that we need to hear it, do we need to hear it? And that's the question. What other ways can we engage with the body and our other senses in order to hear? So that's what I find really interesting, partly because of my own situation, because the body is being used quite a lot, and because I'm conscious of, sounds that can be heard, sounds that I can make sense of, sounds that I can't hear, sounds that I can hear but cannot make sense of, sounds that I can hear that can be just incredibly painful, all of those sort of things. So I then need to redirect them throughout my body in order for them to make sense for me, in order to build that story. So I want the audience to also have that option, where they feel that they don't have to just sit there and receive something, that they are very much participants of the journey, really.
Is there any instruments you struggle to play? Any other instruments you struggle to play or hear? Well, play. I guess we always, for most instruments, we have contact with them, don't we?
Yeah. Absolutely. Percussion is unusual because often we're detached from our instrument. Often it's the mallet or stick or something. And so, of course, sometimes we have connection if we're playing congas or bongos or djembe or whatever it might be. But a lot of times we are detached. So psychologically, you're seeing that stick or mallet as an extension of your limb. And that's important to think about, in how you then attach that to your limb and that connecting point between letting it go, for the stick to speak and for your hand to speak, and then for the sound to speak in the space that we're in. So that I find really interesting. I think the instruments I've struggled with over a long period, but it's just sort of taken time. And bear in mind, with percussion, you're often not playing your own instruments. So you're playing hired instruments or other people's instruments. So there's constant kind of getting to know something. So, and that's unusual with percussion. It's the same with piano, of course, often. But I find that instruments that have high frequencies and that are resonant are really difficult to know what is going on with them. So glockenspiels, cymbals, triangles, tubular bells, those kind of things. So things whereby there's a lot of harmonics, there's a lot of resonance. It's in a register that is extremely difficult to feel other than up kind of here. But this part, I find, of the body doesn't always give you the emotion. So whereas the lower part of my body, I feel, gives me emotion, So up here is kind of almost overloaded, It's hard to explain.
That's interesting because for stage acoustics is a science that's researched a lot at the moment, and we know that musicians generally prefer high frequency content in the reverberation because they can feel. They can feel the details of all the instruments and hear them, where that might be masked by the low frequencies.
Which is, I can understand that, yes. But
so that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
And you say, in your essay, you say that you perceive the high frequencies, high pitch, more on your face.
Yes, the upper part.
And the lower frequencies, you feel them on the lower parts.
Absolutely. And as a player, the lower frequencies are the ones that you have time to digest, and it's a wonderful kind of feeling that it really is. And I guess this is a difference again between, being the participator of the sound and being on this side of the instrument, so you're getting the sound coming up, to your face, to your chest, to your tummy, to wherever it might be. For an audience member, they're not getting that immediate contact really, but they're getting the visual part. And it's always interesting when you have, for example, deaf people who might be attending a rehearsal and they're sitting out in the audience and they're looking at everything and they're, finding it very interesting. And then when they have the opportunity to come on stage and be right next to the instrument, they cannot believe how much more they hear. In their ways, whether it's physically, whether it's through the ear, whatever it might be. But the extra dimension by being close to the instrument is incredible. And it's just a wonderful example always, I feel, about the kind of complexities of hearing, the complexities of sound, the complexities of space, the complexities of positioning, positioning with the instruments, positioning of the people, that you're connecting with, the player, you name it, then the type of mallet that's used, irrespective of dynamics and all sorts of things like that. The materials that are used, there's just so many dimensions to this. And if you are asked, well, what do you hear, what you don't hear, that's really difficult to say. Yeah, I might hear that. And the next time I may not hear it so well, or, yeah, I can hear a bit of that. And yeah, I hear that well. No, you know what I mean? It isn't just black and white. And I think that this could have an impact on how we discuss music, interpretation, translation, all of the elements with music when we're learning an instrument. When we're learning an instrument, we isolate that instrument and the player and the type of music. We don't ever talk about the acoustics, do we? When we're learning an instrument?
No.
I can't remember ever having a discussion about acoustics, in an instrument. But it opened up my world when my teacher said, Evelyn, place your hands on the wall. Can you feel that timpani?
Yeah.
And then the intervals of the timpani. And then as it got closer and closer, that was the beginning of thinking, whoa, there's something extra to sound that I need to be paying attention to. And made me much more aware, not necessarily being able to control acoustics, not at all, but being aware of what acoustics can do and how we need to let the room speak.
Emma, your PR earlier said, you're so good at lip reading that you can, when there's people who speak with accents, and even the French accent.
On the whole, yes.
And I can see that you're, when I'm talking, you're looking to see my lips as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of face reading, really.
Okay.
But you can pick up accents. I'm not saying every accent.
No.
It's taken me a long time to begin to distinguish a generic American accent and a generic Canadian accent.
Okay.
And it's only because certain words that Canadians say are quite similar to Scottish words.
Okay.
So an example is about.
Yeah.
Now, an American might delay or elongate, rather, certain words, about, and the mouth is quite open.
Right.
And with Canadians, is this generally, just
obviously.
to be clear, is more about. So it's more closed. And it's little things like that. Same with Australia, New Zealand. I've now, or beginning to pick up the difference between the two. Otherwise, they were just kind of, and very much back in the mouth and back in the throat, and quite difficult to lip read. But now I'm getting used to that.
How about the French accent?
How
can you tell?
There's a tinge, which is very lovely. And yes, that can be quite closed, actually, with the mouth in general. I find that often people from Glasgow with a strong Glaswegian accent, that can be quite difficult because of the speed. Really just, woof, that's very, very fast.
Yeah.
So, you begin to pick things up. Yeah.
I'm very interested in deliberate practice. Deliberate practice.
Deliberate, yeah.
I'm wondering whether you can be a professional musician. You don't need talent. And by just deliberately practicing. What's your view on this? And if you have a young musician who's passionate about music, doesn't feel that he or she is talented, do you think that would you still encourage that person to pursue a career by just practicing, because we can reach really high levels by practicing? What's your view on this? I'm really interested because there's you put a lot of people in boxes because they are either talented or not talented, and we don't appreciate that our life is really long, and by just practicing because we love it, we can reach a really high level that can make us make a living.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's my view, but...
Yes, indeed. And again, it's sort of isolating one aspect of music, and it's thinking, well, what is a musician? What is the job of a musician, first of all? And there are so many avenues to be a musician that can absolutely affect lives, that can really have a huge impact on lives, to the people that you're giving the music to. And if somebody enjoys practicing, let them practice, and the point is that you have to be able to zoom out of your own situation and be your own teacher, and to know, what you're progressing with, and how you want to progress, and so on. If you're practicing and not progressing, but you're still enjoying practicing, there obviously has to be levels of playing. But if you feel that you're practicing and you still want to be a musician, but you're not getting very far, then accept the fact that by all means, try and be a musician, but don't be disappointed if things don't quite go your way. Simple as that, really. But it is highly competitive, but ultimately it's a profession that can really create such differences in people's lives. If you think, for example, the Olympic opening ceremony of London 2012, you had about 1,000 drummers there. 99.9% of them were volunteers who had never picked up a pair of sticks before, and they were led by experienced students and professionals and so on to get them all together. And now the impact of that was enormous, was incredible. It impacted so many of us, not just us participating, but for many people who were watching that. This sheer, unbelievable, percussive expression of the Industrial Revolution. That was the story, the Industrial Revolution, and then this kind of physical thing of seeing 1,000 people come crunch, on these buckets, and various drums and things, was incredible. So if we all got that impact perfectly together, it wouldn't have had the same impact. It was this dirty, smelly, greasy, oily, hard sound that we were after. So this imperfect crunch was what we needed. And it was kind of, poof, I feel that, I am in this Industrial Revolution. I am one of the people creating the 5 rings, creating something metallic and so on. And it was incredible.
What was your involvement? Were you leading this?
I was leading the drummers on this.
Okay.
And, it was an extraordinary situation whereby then after that event, many of the participants carried on with their drumming, because it was a great sense of feeling and therapy and all sorts of things. They created friendships from that. They created groups from that, that then fed into their communities, and all sorts of things happened with that from people who had not picked up sticks before. So it was a great example where the story led the way. That was the journey. It wasn't about of course, people had to learn a rhythm and they had to, kind of play it vaguely right, but ultimately it was the story that led this. And so it wasn't now you must go home and practice 8 hours a day playing single strokes and that type of thing. It would never have worked. If somebody wanted to do that, fine, that's great. And so there's no right or wrong. But again, it's coming back to the story, what is the story of that Bach partita on a snare drum? What is that story? And the story is all of these colours, and you're not going to get that from a method book or study book.
No.
So I feel very passionate about that.
We're reaching the last questions. I usually ask questions about venues. Can you give me your 5 most memorable venues, or the 5 venues you really like playing in, and for different reasons?
Oh my goodness. Hard to pick 5. I think some of the more unusual ones, I mean, somewhere like the Royal Albert Hall is interesting. Not so much from an acoustic point of view, because it is quite difficult to play there and to control the sound.
Yeah.
So to just create a whisper is sometimes going to be a lost cause. But the grandeur of the space and how the audience is in this circle creates a feeling of real togetherness, of whereby you are literally experiencing this music or whatever is happening together, rather than walk on stage, you feel quite isolated, and by the way, the audience is there. So that's quite special, you know, from that point of view. And the fact that you can get a lot of people in that space, and they're often incredibly good listeners there. Yeah. They can see every member of the audience, more or less, you know what I mean? You can see, and you really feel this togetherness. So I think that's a special venue. I remember playing at the Hollywood Bowl many years ago. And so in a situation like that, I can't remember now how many people it holds, but thousands and thousands. And you're then very much reliant on the technical team to take care of your sound, basically. And that's interesting as well. So any kind of outdoor venue, you know that your dynamic levels will all have to come up. The physical aspects of playing will have to change and be more dynamic, and so on. And then basically your sound is taken care of by the technical crew there. So you can only control what you can control in that aspect. And you have to see the technical team as part of the performance, you know, and this is real teamwork that comes into play. I love playing in a lot of the Japanese halls. I realize I'm not just picking and naming, you know, one or the other.
Don't worry.
A lot of the Japanese halls are incredibly consistent.
So in Japanese hall, you mean the stage is at roughly the center, and the audience can be all around, which we call vineyards. Is that correct?
No, I simply mean a lot of the halls in Japan.
Oh, in Japan, okay.
Yes, are very kind of clean, often rectangular, unfussy, very good acoustics, and you can, in many cases, really just play how you feel. Yeah, you know. Even in school halls there, they can be really tremendous halls, actually. I like to, I've enjoyed playing in places like I've forgotten the name of the actual hall, but in Dallas, where the Dallas Symphony Orchestra play, and likewise where the Fort Worth Symphony Orchestra play, really beautiful halls there. Okay,
I'm trying to find the names.
Yes, I can't remember the name now. Yes, I mean, there's, and I remember playing in interesting places like a tomb in Palestine, which was quite extraordinary, actually. Again, very intimate. Yes, it's difficult to just pick favourite halls, because again, it's one of those things, certainly with percussion, where, as I say, you're dealing with a myriad of instruments, and some work really well and some less well, but also the type of music that's played, you know, the type of combinations of instruments and all sorts of things. So it's difficult to just say a hall can cope with absolutely everything. So that's why I'm usually quite hesitant to say that's your perfect hall.
Yeah. I completely agree. There's, different halls are made for different types of music, and also different taste of listeners as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
The Royal, I can't remember exactly the volume of the Royal Albert Hall, but there's a certain volume, like a range of volume, that is ideal for acoustic music, and it's roughly around 10 cubic meters per seat. But the Royal Albert Hall is way over this, and hence, so it's a big volume that you really need to play really loudly to
Yes.
make it resonate correctly.
Yes.
I'm trying to speak in layman's terms. And therefore, it's really hard to hear like pianissimo, very soft and
Yes.
quiet sections.
Yes.
Because the volume is too big and it kind of absorbs.
Absolutely. And then there's always the kind of challenge that certainly with percussion is that what the kind of volume of what's happening on stage that is suitable for musicians.
Yeah.
And of course, this is a whole other topic, about hearing levels and hearing protection and
Yes.
the materials used, the kind of earplugs and all sorts of ear protection and so on. So that's a whole other thing, because often what you feel inside of yourself in what you want to express, I find that, as a musician, I want to express any dynamic possible that I physically can produce and that I kind of in my mind mentally think about. That's what I want to be able to do. So if I want to bring that ceiling down, I want to feel I can do that. If I want people to think, is she doing anything? I want people to feel that. But of course, that's not always possible to do on stage, because it could be that if you want to go rattling on tempo blocks, that, the poor cellos or violins or the rest of the orchestra are just going to say, whoa, that's just too much, So what you sometimes want to do is not always allowed to happen for, reasons I understand. So therefore that will affect then what goes out into the hall. So there's all sorts of issues, really, I think, that are interesting. And then, of course, what does somebody receive digitally from that dynamic? That's a whole thing again. So that'll be a different experience.
Is there any places, I won't say hall because you mentioned the Hollywood Bowl, which is not a hall.
No.
Any places that you haven't been or you haven't performed yet and you would like to perform? I don't think there's that many.
Yes, well, actually, we have a map downstairs, and although I've been to many, many places, there are many territories I have not been. So there are large swathes of Russia I have not been. So although I've been to Russia many, many times, it's only been to Moscow and St. Petersburg.
Okay.
So there's a great deal of that country. A great deal of Siberia, of course, I haven't been to. There's a great deal of South America I haven't been to.
Okay.
So although I've been there a lot, it's only been to certain places. Brazil, I've been so many times to, and other places, Venezuela and Colombia and so on. But there's a lot of territories I've not been to. America has been covered a lot. There's a lot of Central America I haven't been to, only to Mexico.
How about Asia? There seems to be
Asia
have
I've
been
been
a
to
lot.
a lot.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. But again, there's a lot of places in mainland China I have not been to. Again, it's just your key cities, really. And Africa, although I've climbed Kilimanjaro, I've not actually performed in Africa. So that's a whole continent, There's a lot of the Middle East that I've not performed in. Again, just key places that I've been to. A lot of the places now, there are several places now in the world that we wouldn't want to go to at this time.
Yeah.
And that's really sad. And I feel very grateful to have had the experience of being in those places that unfortunately would not be areas that are wise to go to at this point. So yes, there's lots of the Middle East and lots of other territories that I'd love to go to, that hopefully one day. But I find that I'm not as anxious to go to certain or to travel in quite the same way as I used to.
Yeah.
And part of that is because of how travel is.
Yeah.
And part of it obviously is where my focus is right now. And also
Where's your focus at the moment?
Pardon?
What are you focusing on at the moment?
It's really the foundation and collection.
Okay.
Obviously, I'm still focusing on the playing and commissioning, but it's not to that kind of degree where It's now, the aim was to create and sustain a career as a solo percussionist so that the next generation could come through and say, I want to be a soloist, and there's a repertoire to keep me going here. Yeah. And that's been really important. And so I don't feel that there's the same kind of feeling where I've got to keep commissioning, I've got to keep, kind of promoting percussion in front of the orchestra or in a recital. And so that's allowed me to free up some of my time to really concentrate on the foundation, whose mission is to teach the world to listen. And the foundation is interesting because it's not a music foundation, because Teach the World to Listen, it affects all of us in any kind of industry. Yeah. And it's often the listening aspect that is the thing that glues us together. And so how the foundation engages with different industries like sport, like entertainment or music, like education, socially, business, and so on, is that's what I'm kind of really interested in and curious about. Yeah. So yes, a lot of my focus is on that.
Is that why you, we need to finish, but probably the last question, is that why you created your podcast? As part of that focus, or it's another project?
Well, the podcast happened before the pandemic, actually. And so it was something that I was interested in doing. I was interested in speaking with, it was partly to do with listening, because I wanted to find out, from different types of people in different industries, what does listening mean to them? Mm-hmm. And I hadn't formed the foundation at that point. Yeah. It had been bubbling in my mind, but the podcast wasn't hinged on that, really. Yes. But then, of course, the pandemic happened. So all of the majority of the podcasts became things that we did digitally, as opposed to face-to-face. And then when we got out of the pandemic and started working again, I just found I didn't have time to continue with the podcast. So that's why we've stalled on those. Haven't quite closed the door on them. I'm still keeping an open mind, maybe in relation to the foundation, perhaps. Mm-hmm. But for the moment, get other things in place. But I just find it very interesting talking to a vet, for example, about listening, because it isn't just the animal that they're listening to, it's the owner as well. They're listening to technology, they're listening to new methods of technology or new ways of creating an operation, doing surgery, you name it. Or, talking to the likes of Bill Bailey about listening as a comedian, and fascinating, and all sorts of different kinds of people, sports people, and you just find that actually the same things come through in any profession. It starts from within. Mm-hmm. It really does. How are you listening to yourself? What are you saying to yourself? What gets you going there? And then how is that listening bridge almost built, to what you're then engaging with? So if it's a new piece of music, it's so easy for us musicians to say, oh, I like that, or, oh, no, I really don't like that piece. And then we kind of think, well, it's badly written, or it's a badly composed, or badly this, badly that. But actually, we haven't given ourselves the chance to just listen. And that means looking at it, listening, leaving it, looking again, leaving it, looking again. Just bit by bit, it goes back to that thing again, like a bit of Lego, when you put another bit together, another bit, and then suddenly, you've got some kind of interesting object there. So listening takes time. It really does. And I think the world we live in at the moment is just so reactive. We've got to have everything now. We've got to, feel it now. We've got to have it now. We've got to be able to do something now. Everything is now, 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 now. And although it's great to live in the present, that doesn't mean that we just have to expect everything to happen now. Yeah. And it's that journey. It goes back to what Steve Davis said about the snooker thing. Yes, the aim is to get the ball in that pot, but feeling the arm, feeling that working so well, feeling the cue, feeling that action, and that, oh, by the way, the ball happens to go in the pot. It's a wonderful thing. So, and that's a form of listening.
Yeah.
It really is.
Well, thank you very much, Evelyn. It's been really nice.
Very welcome. Thank you.
One of the reasons that High Point podcast was created was to meet people like you. And get out of my little cocoon and meet loads of different people who've got different perspectives, view of life. So, as well as visiting venues. So, thank you very much for accepting that invitation or having me here.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Evelyn.